let's get into it. So I don't know about you, but I love raptors, right? They're just so intense and so well evolved to do what they're doing. But before we get into red-tailed hawks specifically, let's talk about just general raptors. So these are our red-tailed hawks, our red-shouldered hawks, owls, vultures, right? All of those things share these characteristics. So they are lightweight, but so powerful, right? So we'll talk a little bit about these in a little bit, but red-tailed hawks only get about 2 to 3 pounds. And I don't know about you, but that kind of blows my mind, right? The fact that these are such good hunters, but they weigh 3 pounds, right? That's kind of nuts. They have these sharp talons. If you look at this picture, they have these huge talons. So a red-tailed hawk is about, I think, a little over an inch, which is terrifying to think about, right? Every single one of those on its feet is a little over an inch, which is huge. They have that sharp hooked beak, right? So we know when we talk about raptors, they're birds, right? So they have the feet that can grab the prey, but they don't have arms or hands to feed themselves. So they need that beak in order to rip apart the meat and feed themselves. And of course, they have the excellent vision. So we can see, I don't know if you know, but hunters or predators and prey have different positions of their eyes, right? So we can see raptors have eyes on the front of their head, whereas something like a deer, which is generally prey, have eyes on the side of their head. So this really helps them have that binocular vision, which acts like a telescope, and their vision is actually 8 times better than ours. So they can see the mouse long before we would ever even know it's there. And then another thing that I thought was interesting about raptors in general is the fact that they have something called a nictitating membrane. So you know, you and I have membranes that go up and down. They have a third membrane that can slide across. So you might have seen it on a shark or an alligator, but birds have it. These birds have it as well. So that's going to help them if they're up in a tree. It can protect from wind, and especially when they're diving at food, right? It can help save their eyesight. So let's talk about our favorite guys here, these red-tailed hawks. So we have, their scientific name is Buteo jamaicensis, right? They, like Becca said, are the most common hawk in Ohio and the majority of the US as well. Their scientific name is kind of interesting, right? So we know indigenous people in North America already knew they were here, but they were first scientifically studied in Jamaica. So that's where they get their the species part of their name from. But Buteo is our soaring hawks. So they like to fly and just float along the air, right? So if you've ever seen a red-tailed hawk fly, he just kind of soars along. And when we talk about these guys, we have these 3 main characteristics, and we'll talk about how they have different morphs in a little bit. But these are the 3 things that you could always look for and have a generally good idea that you're looking at a red-tailed hawk. So of course we have our rust-colored tail feathers. Some people say it's cinnamon-colored, but that's what's going to set our red-tailed hawks apart. They also have this beautiful large white breast, which is very clear when you're looking at them. I know some birds kind of are a little darker and blend in, but these guys, you can always kind of see their chest from far away. And they have this belly band, or these dark streaks on their belly, and that's going to help us know what we're looking at.
I kind of think they look like freckles, Holly. It's like freckles on their belly.
They do. It's exactly what they look like. But when we're trying to identify these hawks, yeah, they look similar to other hawks, but they look so dissimilar within their own species because they exhibit a large amount of individuality within their plumage. So we can look at this red-tailed hawk on Monday and see another one on Tuesday, and they could look like completely different birds, right? They're not all identical. And these ones are relatively large. They're the second largest Buteo here, and their wingspan is over 4 feet long. So when we're identifying our red-tailed hawks, there's a couple things you want to keep an eye out for. One, the female is going to look the same as a male, admittedly, but she's going to be a lot larger, sometimes twice as large as the male. And then our juveniles are going to show even more variance within their plumage. So we know adult red-tailed hawk is going to have that belly band or those cute freckles on their chest, but an immature hawk, it's going to be a lot more splotchy and not as defined. And also juveniles, they don't get their red tail until their second year. So their tail is going to look really kind of bland and dull. Okay. So when we talk about red-tailed hawks, we already said that they are built for hunting, right? So when you think about where their prey is, it preys on the ground, but obviously birds don't like being on the ground. So where are they going to hunt from? This is why we see most of them along the highways, where we can see them up from a vantage point where they can look down and see their prey. So they really like to be anywhere where there's tall trees that overlook clearings. And that makes sense why we see them along highways, because you have the tall trees and then you have that open space where you can see small mammals and mice. And that makes up most of their diet. So they do eat mice and small mammals. That actually makes up 90% of their diet, but sometimes they venture, right? Just like us, they get a craving for something else or whatever they can catch, really. And they get amphibians, reptiles, insects, and carrion, which we know is the dead things that we'll see. And when we talk about hawks, if it's small, when they catch it, whatever their prey is, they'll carry it back to a perch for their own safety. But if they look out and they get something big, maybe they can't carry it. So they'll feed on it at the ground until they make it small enough to carry away with them.
All right, so we already mentioned that red-tailed hawks are the most common hawk in Ohio, right? And they're easy to see when you're out visiting Portage Parks. I know Jan mentioned earlier that she sees them when she's driving along the road, right? We see them on roadsides often, and we're going to talk about that again too. But if you are looking for red-tailed hawks and you want to go out and visit your parks and see where they are hanging out and hunting, I would first send you to Trail Lake Park. Holly and I were just there earlier this week and saw two who we think were getting ready to start courting each other. It is the time of year when they start getting ready to look for their Valentine. And so Trail Lake Park would be a great place to go visit. There's great habitat there for them to hunt over the water a little bit, but there's also enough field there on the edge of the trees that they like to hunt. You'll see them at Towner's Woods. They'll frequently be along the hike and bike trail there, as I've got mentioned on there, and then at Dick's Park is another great place. I have a volunteer who walks the hike and bike trail almost every morning, and he frequently sees red-tailed hawks and will send me pictures. They'll usually be sitting near roads, like Jan mentioned earlier, or sitting up above where the road or a railway will cross over the trail and look for little tiny yummy things that are crossing the trail that they can swoop down and enjoy. All right, and so red tails are an incredibly important part of our ecosystem. They've been around for a long time, and we want them to be around for a long time. A really good thing about red-tailed hawks is that, unlike some of the other animals that Holly and I will talk to you about, is that red-tailed hawks are doing fantastic. We're not worried about their populations. They are incredibly adaptable. So they have learned to live with humans, whether that is in an agricultural setting where they come and hunt on the edge of cornfields after the farmers remove the crops and come get all the rodents that are going to be out there eating the leftovers. Or they can even live in urban environments, kind of closer to people. They'll hunt the rodents that people attract, because as humans, we have a tendency to produce a lot of waste. Therefore, we attract a lot of rodents where we live, and rodents are their main food source. But by being as a part of the food chain in our parks, they help maintain the rodent populations. So this allows us to make sure that we don't have too many rodents who are eating some of our herbaceous plants and reducing our plant populations, keeping things in balance. Farmers love red-tailed hawks, actually, because they'll help keep the rodent populations under control for agricultural reasons. And then they do clean up carrion to an extent, as Holly mentioned. They've been known to steal carrion from other birds. Sometimes they'll scare them off. But if they find something that they think is good enough to eat, they will eat something that they already found dead. And then it doesn't sit there and rot and get diseases. Sorry, Holly, I can't click to the...
You're good. You're good. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to spot a red-tailed hawk. So this image that I put in here is kind of misleading because this is beautiful and you could tell what it is, but a lot of times you're going to see a large bird against the sky and it's just going to appear dark, right? And we're not going to see a lot. So there are some other characteristics that you could look for to give you hints as to what bird you're looking for. Okay, so first you want to look for its shape. So if you look at the red-tailed hawk here, their wings look really strong and muscular, right? And they're kind of broad. So they're, like we said, they're Buteos, they're soaring hawks, so they need those muscles in order to keep them afloat, and those really broad, long feathers in order to provide them like the air resistance to keep going. Okay, if you're lucky enough to see the colors on it, that would be your second way to tell. Okay, of course, look for that beautiful red tail. If you can see the belly band, if you can see some of the striping on their wings, that's also going to help you as well. You're also going to look for behavior and environment. And a lot of these things that we're talking about apply to all birds, right? When you go out birding. But when we're talking about behavior here, you're going to know it's a hawk, how it's hunting, how it's soaring. So red-tailed hawks, they're going to soar around and look, or they're going to be perched and looking down on the ground. Okay, they're not going to do a lot of flittering back and forth unless they're in a courting ritual. They're just going to soar, or they're going to perch, right? And again, their environment. So remember what we talked about. They like being up high over a clearing. Okay, so if you're over something that's really dense, they might be in there, but that's going to make it harder for them to hunt. So you might think of a different bird that might be more apt for that environment. Okay. And then again, keep in mind the differences between the males and females. Females are going to be larger, and then the juveniles look a lot different too. And those are going to vary between species as well. Okay. So let's talk about the differences between our red tails that we're talking about today and other birds that you might confuse them with. I know I do every single time.
I was going to say, Holly, and this takes practice.
Yes.
Holly and I still get confused. We've been comparing a specific picture of a hawk all week, actually, and we've been looking at a lot of hawks, and we have friends who are even better, who are really good at hawk ID, and even they get confused sometimes. So remember, Holly mentioned the variations in their plumage, and juveniles will throw you for a loop very often. Mm-hmm. So it takes a lot of practice, and that's why we're kind of talking about comparison, so that it's if you see a hawk, you'll be able to do your best to try to determine what it is, but don't feel bad if it takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, it still takes also a lot of time. You're totally right. But when we look at the species, there are some things that will help you make these comparisons, and the more you practice and the more you go out birding, the better you'll get, right? So if we look at the red-tailed hawk, he has his belly band, he has his nice white chest, and just a little bit of coloration up on the wings, and of course that cinnamon or rust colored tail. If you compare him to the one that's usually confused with him, we have our red-shouldered hawk, right? Even the name is similar, but they're going to be a lot more dark along the chest. So the whole tops of their wings are going to be red. Their chest is going to be red. And instead of just having a belly band, they have bars all over their chest and belly, right? So we can see the difference between just the coloration of the birds. Size and shape, they're going to be pretty much the same, but if you can see the color, that's going to help you as well. And in addition, the red-shouldered hawk, his tail, you can see, has a lot of barring on it, right? So just bands of white and dark color. All right, here's our little quiz for the day. So Becca, you can see the chat box, right? Which bird do we think is the red-tailed hawk? The left or the right? You can throw that in the chat box. Take your guess.
You're just answering left or right. Which one is the red-tailed hawk? We'll give you guys a couple seconds here to put your guesses in. We've got a couple lefts off the bat.
They're paying attention.
Yeah, we got rock stars tonight. Everybody got it right.
Perfect. Good job, guys. 100%. That's awesome. So yeah, we can see the chest is what stands out to me specifically, right? We see his red chest with all these bars versus our red tail that has the white chest with just the band here, right? You can't see the tail on the red-tailed, but right here on the red-shouldered, you can see some of those bars on the right there. Yeah. Another one that doesn't necessarily get confused by the way they look, but there's another way they get confused. So if we asked you again, I'm sure you would all say the one on the left is very clearly the red-tailed hawk. We all know the one on the right is the American bald eagle, right? So we're not going to confuse them by the way they look, but Hollywood loves to confuse the way they sound, right? So if you're watching an old Western or commercials, if they have a bald eagle that's trying to look regal and majestic, and they do, but they don't sound regal and majestic, right? So they substitute a lot of the time, instead of playing the bald eagle sound, they'll put a red-tailed hawk sound over the bald eagle flying just to make it sound that much tougher. So I'll pull the sound up for us. This is a red-tailed hawk sound. You hear that?
Majestic.
Yeah. So it's a very shrill keer sound, right? And it does sound scary and intimidating, right? If we talk about our bald eagle, they're a beautiful symbol, but their sounds they're almost comical, right? So that doesn't really give regal and majestic vibes. I don't know about you, but you might have heard it. It's been in a lot of commercials. There was a show on called The Colbert Report, right? And he had a bald eagle that would swoop in the beginning, but it was indeed a red-tailed hawk that was making the sound for the intro to his show. And while we're making comparisons, remember the red-tailed is a very shrill sound, and here's a red shoulder. It makes the same word. It still says keer, but it's a lot more clear. Oh, did I trick you? Which one was that? I clicked the wrong button, so that was the red-tailed again.
You're gonna have everybody's pets going nuts because Aaron and Jan's pets are watching and listening. That's what we did at our last presentation too.
Yeah. Okay. That was just a joke. You could hear how shrill it was again. That's the red tail. Here's the red-shouldered hawk. Okay. Can we see how that's a little bit more clear sounding and not so shrill?
All right, so remember I said it's Valentine's Day and our hawks, our red tails are looking for their Valentines. Holly and I really tried to have like a Valentine hawk pun title and we couldn't get there. So you guys are gonna have to help us out next time. We'll do like a title competition. So our red tails are getting ready to put on some really cool displays for us through February here. As they court each other. And remember, Holly said that the juvenile red-tailed hawks don't get that red tail until about their second year. They don't start courting and mating until closer to 3. So about that age, when they've got that nice, beautiful red plumage on their tail, they'll find a mate, and they will hopefully find a mate, right, by doing some really cool air show displays for us, right? So if you like to go up and see the Cleveland Air Show, you don't have to go every year. You can just stay in Portage County and watch the red-tailed hawks sometimes. So they will actually fly up very high together. To soar together in circles. They'll make their cries like Holly was playing for you. And then they will engage in these maneuvers that look a lot like they're diving for things. Sometimes they'll pass prey between each other. They've been known to hold on to each other and fall for a distance and then let go and swoop back up. If you ever get a chance to watch, it's really, really neat. I did have a senior hike last year in early spring, and we had probably 5 red tails above us just swooping around and soaring and doing the circles, and it's really, really fun to watch if you get a chance. So hopefully a male will impress a female by doing this display. They'll fly off together. They usually engage in some preening, and then after that they will mate, and hopefully we'll get some more red-tailed hawks. They are known to be monogamous. They will mate for life. Usually they will only find a new mate if their current mate passes.
And once they find that one true mate of their life, then they're going to do what everything in nature does. They're going to reproduce and continue on their species. So you might have to look a little close, but you could see a little baby red tail looking at you with its white head, right? So they don't get their plumage for a while, but he's looking at us. So the male and the female, again, they like to be up high and situated so they can see out. So they're going to place them up in like the fork of a tree. Males and females are going to build the nest together, so they both help. Okay, if it's not in a tree, they might find a man-made structure, like a window ledge or maybe a billboard platform, and then Once the nest is built, then the female will lay the eggs, and they're both parents are going to incubate the eggs. So they're going to sit on them and keep them warm until the eggs are ready to hatch. Once that happens, the male is going to be the one that's in charge of hunting. So he'll go out, find the food, and bring it back so that the female and the babies can eat. And while they're little, the female will rip up the food for the baby hawks, right? Until they're about 4 and 5 weeks, and then they can kind of do that on their own. Then after that 4 to 5 weeks, that's when they're going to start stretching their wings. So they're not going to quite leave yet, but they're going to bounce around and get used to flapping their wings, feeling a little bit stronger. And then at about 6 to 7 weeks, they can leave the nest, but they're still not capable of really strong flight. And it'll stay that way for like another 2 weeks. And after that, even when they're soaring, they may hang around the nest for a little bit longer. So they have a pretty strong familial structure here.
All right, so we mentioned that one of the places you're most likely to see those red-tailed hawks is along the side of the road, especially in the winter when we get red tails who are coming down from the north who actually spend their winters down here with us. There's a lot more red tails around, so the pressure to find food is increased, and a great place for them to find food is along the sides of the roads. Unfortunately, roads are great places for rodents because as if you've been a part of a park cleanup with me before, you know that's where a lot of the trash kind of concentrates. And because people are throwing out things along the sides of roads, rodents are attracted to that area, and red tails know that. They've figured it out. So they do run a risk of being hit by cars. I've had a couple close calls. I actually messaged Holly the other day, probably on my way to Trail Lake, that one swooped down right in front of my truck as I was heading up that way. And it scares you when that happens. So definitely car collisions are a risk to our hawks. Decreased habitat is going to be a risk to any wildlife. And that's a big reason why at Portage Park District, we try to conserve as much as we can for these animals, the wildlife, to have places to live, right? Rodent poisoning plays a threat to red tails if they ingest voles or mice or rats that have been poisoned, because people are trying to keep those out of places where humans are. And then they can be susceptible to some diseases. They are not quite as social. They don't hang around in as large of groups as some other birds. So the avian flu, avian influenza doesn't pose as large of a risk to our red-tailed hawks. But they can get West Nile, which will affect brain function. So if you see a red tail acting disoriented, that could be a reason why. They also get parasites, like many of our wildlife are susceptible to. And then if they ingest carrion that has been killed with lead-based ammunition, they could get lead poisoning as well.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good example of how the food chain really works, right? So if people are poisoning the rodents, it doesn't just stop there, it's going to continue up. So to be a little bit more mindful of that.
Absolutely. So if you do come across an injured hawk, first, I want you to stop and make sure that what you're seeing is actually an injured animal. Holly mentioned that when they fledge from the nest, they don't know how to fly right away, right? And they usually hang around with their parents for a while as they're learning those things. And so they might just be learning to fly. They might not actually need you to intervene. So first, observe, see if the animal can get out of the area that it's in. If it's overly, if it's hurt and it's in the middle of the road, if you're noticing it can't leave the dangerous place that it's in, it might be time to intervene. But then you need to make sure that you are not going to put yourself or the hawk at more risk by intervening. So if you are going to touch a red-tailed hawk and move it out of somewhere, I highly recommend that you're going to put gloves on. If you can, try not to touch it. And your best bet here in Portage County is to contact our wildlife officer. I've actually put Marino Pellegrini's phone number there if you guys want to copy that down, or it's on the Division of Wildlife website. And remember that they are not pets, unless you are a trained and licensed wildlife rehabilitator. Your name would be on a certain list somewhere, and I don't know if anybody here is tonight. But please, please do not keep the red-tailed hawk. They belong living free and in the wild, right? And so if it needs intervention, Mr. Pellegrini will be able to direct you to a raptor rescue who could do that. I'm not familiar with one in Portage County at this time. Stark County has a fantastic program that rehabilitates birds. We do have some rehabilitation in Hiram, if you guys are familiar with the Hiram Field Station up there, but I'm not sure if they take in raptors. If not, Geauga and Lake County are well equipped, and they do a great job of getting our birds back to the wild if they can be returned.
Okay, so you've heard us talk all about our red-tailed hawks, but now let's go look at some. So we invite you to join us on a couple different adventures. So the first one is kind of a free-for-all. You might have heard of the Great Backyard Bird Count. That's coming up on February 17th through the 20th. And we don't host it. It's a nationwide process and even international because it goes into Canada. But it's by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and the Audubon Society. So it's just a citizen science program where you can go out and use either one of their apps to track what animals you're seeing, and then it goes right into their database. And then if you want to come hang out with us, we're having our Birding for Beginners kickoff hike. That's going to be on Saturday, February 25th at 8 a.m. I know it's early, but we like seeing the birds, right? And we're going to see more if we go a little bit earlier. And that's going to be at Trail Lake Park. So there's a really good chance that we'll see our hawk friends there.
All right, Holly, we have some really good questions tonight.
All right.
I'm going to go ahead and read the first one from Jan here. So Jan's kind of talking about the difference between owls and hawks. So we all know that owls can turn their heads around, right, to increase their field of vision. And she wants to know what's the difference in vision between hawks and owls. And Holly, if you don't, I have an answer to this if you want, and then.
Well, I'll just say what I know. I don't know all of it, but if you think about when they hunt, right? So we see our hawks during the day and owls are at night, right? And then if you think more about that, think about the size of their eyes. So yeah, raptors have great eyes, but owls have even bigger eyes. And if you have bigger eyes, then you can let in more light. So that allows the owls to see at night. Whereas our hawks, they're not going to hunt at night because they can't see as well as the hawks or as the owls. I get myself confused. Owls hunt at night with big eyes.
Yeah. And then remember that Holly mentioned that hawks have that binocular vision. Hawks also have a ridge above their eyes that kind of almost acts like if the sun's out and you're wearing a baseball cap or you put your hand up, right, will help keep the sun out of their eyes. And scientists have started to look into raptors' abilities to see ultraviolet light. And I don't know that there's anything like conclusive on this, but it's kind of exciting. And so there might be a difference in what they can see as far as outside of our vision, our spectrum of vision. And that would probably be different from a great horned owl, just because, as Holly mentioned, they're hunting at different times as well. So both have excellently adapted vision for when they're hunting for, is the big difference.
Mm-hmm. Good question, Jan.
Yeah, that was a really good question.
Kathy said, will they go after something as large as rabbits? I would say yes. Okay, so remember, they're trying to survive. And yes, it's easier to get mice and small mammals, but if they're hungry and they think they could do it, they're going to go after a rabbit. So I haven't seen them go for a rabbit, but I have seen them eating a crow. And a crow is a relatively large bird. And so, but of course, remember, think about where they're going to take that food. So when he was eating the crow, he was on the ground, tearing it apart. So a rabbit, he might be successful in hunting it. Those talons will certainly do the job, but does he feel safe enough to eat it there on the ground before he can take it off with him?
Absolutely. And remember, I'm sure there's people here who have a grandma or great grandma who referred to red-tailed hawks as chicken hawks. And they're not called chicken hawks because they were scared of stuff. They were called chicken hawks because they were eating chickens from the backyard. And they will go after a chicken, but like how Holly mentioned, they're only 3 pounds, right? So they're not necessarily going to be able to pick up a large chicken or a rabbit and carry it away to eat. So they'll probably eat what they can of it on the ground. If something else killed the chicken or the rabbit, then they would come in and take advantage of that situation. But yeah, they can eat cute bunnies. Sorry, guys.
The circle of life. Jan said time of day to spot them. So anytime when the sun is up, but like a lot of our birds that soar, they like to take advantage of like the afternoon, because as the day starts to heat up, they're going to be able to take advantage of the changes in the atmosphere and the air lifting, I guess, and that allows them to soar. So just like the turkey vultures, when they come back, and take advantage of that mid-afternoon heat.
Those thermals, right?
Yeah, the thermals. Time, year they court and mate. We're getting into it. So we were hoping to see that one group at Trail Lake start, but
yeah, I think Holly and I think someone dressed in a big bright red jogging suit scared our raptors away. But Jan, they'll be starting to mate now through early March. And they're actually mating at the same time as great horned owls are. And I didn't mention this in hazards and wanted to, it's in my notes. But great horned owls and red-tailed hawks will compete for nest sites, and they can be a hazard to each other. So they will get into fights. They're also known to throw each other's young or eggs out of the nest and then use the nest for themselves. So a little cutthroat in the raptor world.
And I think the last question was males versus females, right?
Differences in appearance.
Yeah. So the physical appearance, no, they're gonna have the red tail, the white chest, the belly band, but the females are going to be considerably larger, sometimes twice as big as the males, which is pretty common for most raptors. And then as far as behavior, like she'll hang around on the nest a little bit more. She'll still go hunt, but the male will do the hunting. But as far as physical appearance, no.
Awesome. Great questions.
Yeah.
We also had in the chat, I'll wait to see if anybody else has any raptor questions, but Wendy had a question about the location of Trail Lake Park in relation to Beckwith's Orchard. So Wendy, if you're still hanging out, right? I'm going to answer that. I just want to give everybody a few more minutes here to see if you wanted to ask anything else about red-tailed hawks. And then, oh, Wendy says I can tell you. Wendy, if you're, I could even email you a map too, but you would just continue down Brady Lake Road, and then you would turn onto, and then you turn onto Ravenna Road, right, which is the road that Towners is on. So if you continued past Beckwith's Orchard, then when you get to the intersection with Ravenna Road, you make a left into Towners Woods. There is a sign there saying that the park is closed, the road is closed, but the park is not closed, and our entrance is before the section of the road is closed. Mm-hmm. Didn't see the sign. Okay. Wendy, I can, we've got your email. I can email you a better map too. Huh. All right, we'll hook her up with a map.
Maybe she just continued. You know how it forks right there, and it comes up pretty quick. Maybe just there's a left hand on the fork. If I'm thinking of the right place where you are. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Did you?
I didn't. You guys asked really good questions tonight, though. That was fantastic.
I am. She's in the chat.
Our favorite birds. Yeah, Andrea hopped on, our resident red-tailed hawk photographer.
Yeah, she's dedicated. She'll run outside whenever you need it.
Whenever you need it.
All right. Well, thank you for the great questions. Thank you for listening today. Again, if you know anyone that missed it, or if you want to go back and review anything, this will be posted on YouTube soon. So thank you for hanging out with us tonight.
Thank you, everybody. Good job, Holly.
Good job, Becca.
That was awesome.